Good afternoon, it could be good evening or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Over in the UK, it's the afternoon. We have a wonderful guest today. I met Vickie Lea, who has been on a couple of my courses in the past, and we've spoken before. And she's a communications expert. She knows her stuff. She works in various areas: emotional intelligence, culture, dimension, diversity, and behaviour. She's got a vast amount of experience, and today she's been really kind to come on board the show. She's going to talk about suicide and male suicide, something that she's experienced personally with her husband years ago. And you look at the statistics on suicide in general. Male suicide, I believe, according to the statistics, is about 75% higher, or 2/3 higher across the board compared to the female suicide. That's not to say that we're sort of comparing here, but you experiencing it firsthand, Vickie, I think will sort of shed some light in at least some of the suggested correlative factors around this area. Vickie, thanks for coming on board the show. Good to see you. So let's sort of start with, tell us your story. Next week is Suicide Prevention Day, I believe, and Awareness
Yes.
Week. Tell us a bit about your story, please.
Okay. Hi. Nice to see you, Jimmy. My story, I'm a pretty tenacious sort of character, and I was born in the outback in Australia, and I'm capable, and I'm strong, and I'm self-assured. And my husband was diagnosed with an inoperable tumor, a very rare inoperable tumor. And at that stage, there was a misdiagnosis, and they had given him only 6 weeks to live. We were currently living in Melbourne, and our children were in Sydney. So one of the things that just happened was not long after the diagnosis, within sort of, I think it was about 24 hours, he came to bed very late, and I remember hearing sort of a rustling at the side of the bed. And he was, unbeknownst to me, popping pills out, and then took them, and he'd had some alcohol. And we were sort of just starting to snuggle up, and I thought that was an unusual sound. And then he just said, "Look, I think I've done something silly." And I said, "Oh, what?" And he said, "I've just taken an overdose, and I don't know what to do." And it was the most surreal moment. I sort of hopped out the side of the bed, and he hopped out the side of the bed. And it was a very high bed, and I'm very short. And we looked at each other in this very dim morning light. I think it was around about 2 or 3 in the morning. And I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, I ring the hospital." And he said, "Well, I don't know whether I want anyone to know." And we're talking about men not necessarily sharing. And he said, "I don't know whether I want anyone else to know. I don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, in the movies, they get them to throw up." And it was surreal. And we went over to the bathroom, and he subsequently, did his business and curled back into bed. And I'd said to him in the morning, "Well, what do you want to do?" And he was currently under contract for a major corporation. And he said, "Well, I think maybe I should go to work." And I said, "Well, perhaps doing the normal thing will be the right thing to do." And we'd only just had the news that he'd only been given 6 weeks to live. You don't know quite what to do in that time. And so he packed himself off to work, and I sent him off, with his lunch as well. And which is surreal, even making lunch for someone. Why are you going to work when you've only got 6 weeks to live? And anyway, I was able to get some counselling later that day, and they told me about the crisis team, which I explained to him that evening. And we worked through and brought the children down from Sydney, and he said he wouldn't try that again, and we'd look for any sort of cures. And then in the meantime, of course, the hospital called us back and said that they'd misdiagnosed that he's got a very rare tumour. However, they don't know how long he'll live for, and that he'll subsequently die from a heart attack or a stroke. And so we came to England. They saw about 100 of these tumours a year here at the Royal Marsden. And he was working as well because he wanted to be the provider, the family figure. We were running our family business. and we had contractors. We had other people that were responsible for us and our businesses. And so then, of course, coming here, the tumour got a lot worse, and I was working at a university at the time. And over a period of around about 7 or 8 years, he had 8 major attempts at suicide and 20 smaller ones. He was very much an academic. He was an A-grade golfer. He was an A-grade tennis player. He had, I think 3, 4, 5 degrees. So he was well studied. He was a well-educated man. And he just wasn't very good at the practical side of finishing his life in his own terms with his own hands. And through this period, we kept the family going. We had young teenagers who of course, turned into grown adults. They were living with this. I was living with it. I was going to work without anyone knowing. Andrew didn't want anyone to know what he was going through. And so subsequently, of course, on the 9th, what I say the 9th attempt, the police told me it's not called an attempt, it's called a successful suicide. So you have 8 suicide attempts and the last one successful. And so, we went through all of that with him to the end, and then it's surviving afterwards, what you go through afterwards for the family and for the children. And from that, I did a double master's, and I in business and consulting, and then I went into coaching other people. And that's where I am today. I still, of course, get very teary-eyed if I see something on the TV, and it's so prominent to have suicide featured in trendy action shows. I don't know whether sometimes they realize how it affects other people. And I love to help people. I suppose I help people express themselves, because I think generally men in business tend to not have that network to express themselves. It's certainly something that happened with Andy, whereas women do have a community. And I don't want to be sexist, gender orientated, but I think that's it's a generalization that I've found to be true personally.
That's really interesting in the sense that it's an interesting observation, and I think there is statistical research that suggests that women are more social in the sense that they do participate in social groups probably more than men. But interesting enough, Vickie, something I sort of draw attention to. Last time I was working in Australia, I became aware, whilst I was sort of driving to and fro different places for meetings, work, and other stuff I was doing out there, I noticed there was a lot more in the way of raising awareness around suicide. The radio had a phone line that people could phone up and talk about problems that they had, and it tended to be geared towards men, as far as I can see and understand at that point. I guess the statistics are, I think the Australian Bureau of Statistics estimate around about 2,800 people, or men anyway, I think, I stand corrected, commit suicide every year, which is obviously not significantly high. And when you think the statistics around the Western world, they're all pretty much 6.5 to 1. I think Belgium's got one of the highest statistics, and that might correlate with the fact they have assisted suicide. I don't know. I stand corrected.
The Nordic countries, did you just say then?
I think Belgium as well.
Oh,
I think,
Belgium.
and they have like an assisted. That's my understanding. That might sort of bring the correlation a little bit higher. But all things said and done, there is approximately 2/3 to around about 75%. A report by Samaritans in the UK suggested that 75% more male or men commit suicide to female, and I sense a potential correlation what you said about expressing and being in a social group, and it's like you take a bottle of fizzy pop and you shake it and then you open it, and I think for sure that outlet. What are some of your thoughts on? I don't want to sort of play on paper and talk statistics. You've been through it, firsthand, subjectively. But what are some of your thoughts on the statistics around men being higher than women. Have you got any thoughts around that area? Or
I certainly learnt a lot about suicide over the 8 years that we were going through this, and the subsequent 8 years. I think that those stats that you mentioned are also only the ones that have been reported, and suicides that are reported or found through the coroner. From what I understand, and this is my own personal opinion, and in discussions with other people, a lot of suicides are not reported as suicides. So I think that the stats are actually higher than what you mentioned. That's my belief. I think that there is naturally a network, women build up a network around them, and they're able to ring their girlfriends up or whatever and say, look, I'm feeling really angry or distressed or bothered or whatever. I think men have generally a matter of honor, I think, comes into it. I think it's a matter of generally boys on the football field, toughen up, not cry. I still think that's there. I still think that they're not supposed to be in touch with their emotions, or it's considered a feminine trait rather than it's a human trait. And I think, I would just like to change it even at primary school level, that, we're able to talk about our feelings and communicate how we're feeling, frustrated and angry. And if we say that to someone, that they go, okay, you are frustrated and angry. They don't try and fix it straight away or give a solution straight away. I think that we need to be more, really discuss emotions more and have it as a normal everyday thing. As you just said, in Australia, it's out there. I find other countries, you're talking about cultures, other countries hide emotions that are considered unacceptable or not manly.
That's really interesting stuff, and certainly, growing up in Australia myself, Vickie, from first-hand experience, this is my own subjective experience. It may be different now. I don't know for people growing up, but certainly at the point I was growing up, it was about, and me being heavily involved in sport and all the like, really, I kind of fit into different groups. And the thing is, really, I think that there's almost like an isolation if you don't fit into a certain stereotype.
Absolutely.
That manly stereotype and sort of get on with it type thing. And
toughen up is something I heard a lot growing up. Toughen up.
Very much so. Very much so. And I think that for me, it's almost like putting a lid on a pressure cooker. Certainly, I felt it in my teenage years, and I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it briefly. In my teenage years, I thought it was significant. I thought that there was no real outlet. You couldn't talk to the teachers. You couldn't really talk to anybody in that respect. I think these days things have improved. There are outlets and there's more awareness, and people like yourself are doing some great work, fantastic work at raising awareness. But certainly that generation, it wasn't easy. What I would say too,
I think it's still there. I coach young women as well, and if they said, they're happy for a fellow to talk about his emotions, but only so, and they go only so much. So I think that's still there. I talk with 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds, and they do say, hey, I'd like a man who knows himself, and I'd like a man who's confident, and I like a man who shows his emotions, but I wouldn't want him to show it too much.
Yes, that's really interesting stuff, and the whether that's a correlation to the higher levels of male suicide, it's one of them things, really. I think that these things can be multifactorial. You've explained your subjective experience with your husband.
Yes, lots of different reasons.
The impact was no doubt the diagnosis would have had a big impact. One would have thought, and certainly one could sort of make the assumption that if someone's diagnosed with a major illness, that's going to have a big impact. What I'm sort of like,
well, it's also the no hope. I mean, it's yes, Andrew had a inoperable tumor. It's the no hope that comes from that. So I think that's sort of what you were heading towards, is he still faced, yes, he had a physical reason to want to kill himself, but it's the no hope. There's nothing that could be done. I'm no good to my family. I'm no good to anyone. I'm no longer contributing. I think that's a very male trait.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that the degeneration, potential degeneration for some people with certain conditions. I'm not a medical person. I don't understand the extent of the prognosis that your husband was given, but one could imagine, and certainly in some of the literature I've read and some of the research I've done, certainly there's a fear of a degenerative condition, moving into dependency for some people, and there's a lot of pressure on people. So what I'm suggesting, these things are multifactorial, so there's probably not one thing that is a causation of another.
I agree.
One thing that I do find interesting that you sort of brought up there, and I think it's really important that you mentioned there, and I want to be clear that I'm not sort of saying women have it harder than men and men harder than women, and I think we both have it.
It's subjective.
In different ways. Exactly. I think we both have our challenges. I don't think any one group has a privilege unique. I think we all have our own privileges in our own way, but I don't think there's any one group or person that has an entirely straightforward passage in life. We all suffer on some level. We all, from the moment we're born, experience a degree of suffering, regardless if you're a woman, you're a female. Women have got things going on in their own life. Men have too. We all do. So it's not sort of comparing.
It's not gender specific.
Precisely. But I do think, and I should see your thoughts, is that sometimes you do get two ends of the spectrum, Vickie. At least in my experience, and I talk to women, and they share their story. I talk to men, they share their story, and I think that to go forward, we've got to create some sort of awareness and encourage a dialogue. And your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think it's about dialogue, and I think it's about creating a space that's, I mean, I use the terms in my own coaching, a happy and sad space, where there's not the incrimination if you happen to say that, you're feeling really flat, or you don't feel like you want to live anymore, and without everyone jumping on. I think there needs to be somewhere that we can vent this. Yes. But I think it also needs to be in the language from early childhood. Something along the lines of, I was thinking about this last night before we were going to have this chat today, that children on farms see death, children on farms see life, children see the cycle, they see the value of life, they see, when, if you like, an animal's not performing its function and they have to terminate the life. I think that we're very disassociated with death. We're very disassociated with mental illness. And I think we're disassociated with everything to do with the stresses and strains of families coping with death. They don't really see funeral marches anymore. So I would like to see this brought into primary school children through understanding their emotions, male and female, to understand the emotions that they're going through, and that males and females feel emotions sometimes differently. It's not just humankind.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And then by feeling the emotions and understanding them, and having death a little bit closer to them than it just something that it's read about. I don't know if there's any way we can introduce them seeing animals go through a process of dying, which kids would have seen many years ago in caveman days, in medieval days, and that it's okay to have dialogue about it. I think it's still a taboo subject, even death. Well, I know that we're talking about suicide, but I think even death is still a taboo subject.
I think so, and that's sort of, I've read a lot of the work, the psychiatrist, existential psychotherapist, Behavioural, and he talks about death, anxiety, and I've read a lot of his work, and his book that he released in 1980 is quite fascinating, really, the existential psychotherapist, and certainly I think that there are certain exercises that he talks about that put you in touch with the mortality. And I think in some sense, it almost has like I wouldn't say liberation. And what I would say, it gives you a new way of seeing the world in the sense that, okay, we haven't got an infinite amount of time, and any one of us at any time, could fall off the face of the earth.
Exactly. Even while I'm talking to you, even while I'm talking to you, you wonder about. Go on.
And it's that fragility, Vickie, that makes us appreciate every moment, I think, to a point.
I think we're distant from that. I think we've become distant from that. But the second you mentioned that, I had a memory. The morning that Andrew died, and he had a very violent death. He ran in front of a truck, and the morning he died, I was making breakfast, and it was one day before our 20th anniversary, and I said, "What would you like?" And he said, "Oh, just his normal breakfast with his prunes." And I thought afterwards, why would you have prunes if you were going to go and kill yourself? But he didn't want to distress me. He wanted everything to be normal. And he just before I went to work, he was at the kitchen table, and he was sitting there, and he called me over, and he stood up, and when he first met me, he kissed me a particular way. The very first day, he'd said, "I kiss all my women this way" on our date, right? And he did exactly the same thing. This is the last moment I had with him, and he brought me close to him, and then he slid his fingers up through my hair and brought my face up to his, and he just looked at me and he said, "I regret all the crosswords we ever had. There was no need for it. You are loved." And then he kissed me. And that was the last time I saw him, and within half an hour, he was dead. And I have stopped couples I've seen arguing in the street, and I've gone up to them and said, "Look, do you have 5 minutes?" And I've recanted that story and told them and said, it really is that short life. Don't have any regrets. Don't have the arguments. They're a waste of time. You either love each other or you don't, and then we can work from that. I don't think people realise that it can be gone in a second.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think that that's life. It's the fragility of life. It's life isn't fair as well. Life is who knows? I mean, I think that's why it's important. I think, in my opinion, to create our own meaning and have a sense of purpose, and make
be fulfilled.
Yeah, I mean, do the best we can, what we've got, in the situation we're in, and certainly, I mean, last few years we've seen some high-profile. When I say high-profile suicides, people that prolific in the public eye, or the likes of, say,
entertainment industry.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know these people personally, like the Chris Cornells of this world, and the lead singer of Linkin Park. His name slips my mind, and I suppose people from the outside looking in are probably going to wonder.
They have everything. Why are they doing it?
Yeah. Precisely, and I think that part of me senses the insensitivity when I hear that, because obviously we know in life you can have perceivably what people consider to have everything, but we never know what's going through someone's mind. And I think these things, precisely.
People have said to me, "Gee, Andy, was a coward." People have just said to me he was such a coward to kill himself. And I said to these people, "Do you realise the courage that it took to do that?" For him, he didn't want his wife to turn into a carer, and for his children to see this man shriveled up on the floor, after his another suicide attempt. He was shriveled up on the floor, vomit everywhere, and his children were standing there, and I'm there, and I thought, I can't cope with this any longer. They don't want to see that. Men, I know I don't want to focus necessarily on men, but for my husband, honourable, standing up, strong, wants to be a great provider, and was unable to do that. And
Yes,
it took
indeed.
courage, and he didn't want me to go through agony and
Mm,
pain.
yeah, that's a really, really fascinating point you make there, and certainly when I hear people, uh, especially people who don't know what the situation is, and they
No, they
pull
don't
people
know.
out, and I think that
I'd like to
they
tell some of them what I really think.
precisely, and one doesn't know what one is going through, and it's really interesting. You made a point earlier before about the work that you do with certain women, and they talk about men,
Yes.
and it sort of reminded me that I was doing a course one time, and this young girl on the course had asked me a couple of questions while I was doing a seminar. She was, I believe, looking to raise awareness in the area of suicide. For one reason or the other, I didn't speak to her for long enough to understand. But the little time I had with her, she sort of asked me any correlations, and I said, well, I guess every case is individually unique, but there may be biological factors.
Yes.
There might be genetic uh,
Disposition.
predispositions,
Yeah,
precisely,
absolutely. Absolutely.
psychological factors and sociological factors. And she said, well, what do you mean by psychological and sociological factors? Well, I said, well, I can tell you from my subjective experience, I've known people who've committed suicide. I'm at the age now where I've been around for long enough now to have experienced people I've gone to school with, people I grew up with, people on my journey who I work with, who Vickie are here one day, gone the next.
Mm.
And it's sad. It really is. And the sad thing is some of the things that you mentioned there are really, really interesting, because I think that, and I proceeded to tell her, she asked me what do you mean about sociological factors. And I said, well, we have an event and we have an attitude towards an event, but equally some of the things that we must take in consideration is that this constant shaming
Yes.
of men, it doesn't help. You see it in the media, you see it in memes, you see it that people need to man up, and he needs to be a real man. What on earth is a real man? It's an abstract concept. It's absolutely ridiculous. It really is so abstract that what is the criteria? We see.
The criteria, a lot of it actually is physical. I have clients who, male clients, who have said they don't come up to scratch, and I'm saying, well, what's your idea of scratch? And they said, oh, well, I should really have a six-pack, and I have a tummy, and no woman's going to want to go out with me because I don't have big shoulders, and this affects their security in who they are. They see it, and I'm surprised at the amount of times that actually affects men. I know that it affects women, and that's proven. That it affects men, where they're saying, well, how am I supposed to compete? I wouldn't even go over and ask her out for a date. There's no way she'd want to go out with me. And I'm saying that you're a very intelligent, funny man. Yes, but I don't look like it. And that's real. I mean, I deal with clients with that all the time.
Yes, and I certainly think that men have got this ideological view of the female, where the perception of the female, they've got this ideological view of how she behaves, who she is, and so on and so forth. And I think sometimes they then have this criteria that they need to step into themselves. And I truly believe the criteria is one that is probably not attainable, because we're humans and we have flaws and we make mistakes. And
do you think it's the lack of transparency for ourselves? We're not being exactly who we are the very first time. Well, because we've got this big fear inside that we're going to be rejected.
Well, one time, Vickie, I was passively watching the Simpsons, and
my kids grew up with that. I think it's got some good stories.
No, it has, and is it Homer, the head of the farm, the guy, or supposedly?
Absolutely.
And it's around about Christmas time, and he really wants to impress his family and buy them presents and look after them all. He really wants to do that. He's trying really hard to do that, and he's really struggling at work. And he's got this persona. He's this sort of like bumbling buffoon type person who can't hold a job and things always go wrong. But his heart's in the right place. He really wants to do the best he can, and he really loves his family. He really wants to stand by them. And I believe, if memory serves me correctly, because it's such a long time ago that I watched it, just you sparked the memory off there. he loses his job, and he's overwhelmed by the expectation that he can't fulfill. And he's got this weight on his shoulders that he's got to somehow break the news to the family. Now, I think for me, that sort of the point that you made is a fascinating one, because I truly believe that the expectation that men can put upon themselves. Now, we don't live in an idealistic world. Life isn't easy. There's many variables that we're not in control of. And I certainly think that that pressure, one wouldn't suggest a direct causation, but certainly there is some sort of correlation with our own self-esteem and how we feel about ourselves. And then if you've got people highlighting that, you're not a real man if you don't do this, and you're not a real man if you don't do that, and if you do that, then, you know, I think biologically the male in most species needs to feel needed. And we see at a certain point in a man's life where they become a human doing rather than a human being. So there's almost this anticipation, well, what are you doing for society? And that's the value of your work is based on your doing. And when that's stripped away from you, and you mentioned, I don't know the case exactly with your husband, but you mentioned how he was in his professional existence, you know, he was an academic and sports person. Absolutely. As that's being taken away from you, then your value goes.
Yes.
And once your values...
Absolutely. That was certainly a part of it. His tumour was in the neck. It shriveled up his shoulder. Of course, no longer being able to play tennis. I was washing his hair. He wasn't washing his own hair. And as you said, people also, even when people greet you, people say, "What do you do?" They don't. I know. Instead of saying, "Look, you know, oh, what are you up to today?" And, you know, have you been enjoying something lately? They don't. They say, "What do you do? What school did you go to?" There is a criteria that happens very quickly. I've found more in the UK that they ask what school you go to and where do you live, which I think is quite funny here, because people will tell me that they've lived in if you like, a very underprivileged suburb, and I won't know. I have no idea. You know, I mean, I've lived in Europe and I've lived in Hong Kong and I've lived in Australia. I don't necessarily know a suburb's value. And so I will talk with almost anyone anyway. But people make this judgment very quickly on, what do you do? Where did you go to school? Where do you live? And I think there is a pressure that you're talking about to provide that in order to fit into that circle that they want to fit into.
And in adverse to how empathic one is, how kind one is, how we don't see that as being a contribution and precise. And I think that's, you know, in both scales. I think that's men and women too. I think women as well. Sometimes the undervalue of the work they do in the home, and they bring up children and
as you just mentioned earlier, their figure. You know, well, you didn't use the word figure. You were very careful not to use that. I can use that, where they're supposed to be a particular way. They're not supposed to be, you know, size 24 like I am. They're supposed to be a particular way. And at my age, I should be behaving a different way. They have this very fixed perimeters of how we're supposed to be. I believe that I have sufficient confidence to handle that. And that's, people say to me, "Gee, Vickie, you know, why do you have so many people coming around you and coming to you?" It's the confidence in just who I am. You know, I went on a date, I suppose it must be about 8 months ago, I suppose. And I had a lovely, absolutely wonderful day. And when we went on a second date, the gentleman said to me, "You're the same as what you were on your first date." And I went, "Right." You know, I had I think a hamburger on my first date and a hamburger on my second date, because I love hamburgers. And I didn't necessarily want to go off to the French restaurant, and I was just completely me and eating with my fingers and chatting. And I said, "That's an unusual thing to say." And he said, "Oh, people aren't usually how they present on the first isn't how they're going to really be on the second. And I think that's part of the issue that we're talking about here is I'm transparent. Let's be transparent for who we are. We have flaws, as you said earlier. We all have issues. All of us have gone through crises of some sort. Let's be transparent about that. Let's say, hey, look, you know, with work, I am really finding the volume of work that I've got on at the moment too much to cope with. Is there a way of lightening my load? People don't feel comfortable to say that anymore. They're worried about losing their work or their job, and therefore they can't provide for the families. You just mentioned like Home and Simpson Christmas. There is so much pressure there. Let's get it into the workplace. Let's get it into schools, that it's okay to be transparent, that it's okay to say we're feeling a particular way. However, what is happening is that they're unable to articulate how they feel because they haven't been taught the EQ, which is what I was talking about, you know, at 3 and 4 and 5, that's when we need to be starting to teach EQ, that they know what emotions they're experiencing and that at home is the safe environment to express them.
No, that's interesting stuff, and you know, certainly I think that where women are concerned, females are concerned, the undervalue of what it takes to be a parent, a mother, for example. So the emphasis on the identity one creates through professional existence. The CEO, the salesperson, the teacher, the butcher, the baker, maker. But equally, we know being a mother is more than just the label we give it. It's a huge responsibility, one of the biggest, if not the biggest responsibility one could ever imagine to bring up.
That still has a lack of respect, though.
I think so, and the mother could be seen as being a psychiatrist, a nutritionist, a taxi driver to the children, but that's undermined, in my opinion, in society, in the sense that we sort of place a big emphasis on this sort of profession or persona. But equally, where men are concerned, I think that the shaming language, I think that men put a lot of pressure on themselves in terms of fitting a certain criteria. I personally, I'm not a big fan of these organisations that try and teach men how to attract a person or a woman, for example. And the reason being is it's undermining the man, Vickie. I think that, you know, I'm probably going to get slated now, but I truly believe it's undermining. I believe a man should find fulfillment in other areas as well as. I'm not saying a relationship is the be-all, end-all. I'm not saying one should go into a relationship or not a relationship. There are as many lonely people in relationships as there are on their own. What people do is their call. But I certainly see there's people, in my opinion, in Jim's opinion, there are people exploiting men, vulnerable men, telling them to be a certain way, to look a certain way, in the prospect of attracting a female. And that for me is wrong because, okay, that's a part of life for some people, a big part for some people, but there's a big wide world out there. I would certainly encourage men to find creative solutions to gain fulfillment into, and see the relationship as an extension to oneself. Yes, go out there and if golf floats your boat, tennis, playing music, being a social group, gaming, whatever they choose to do is entirely up to them. They shouldn't be shamed and saying, well, actually, you know what, you're not a man if you don't do this and the other. And I think for me personally, I think sometimes, you know, it's like, I was at a motivational seminar one time, and the motivational speaker, who had some value, but at the point that he started saying how a relationship was the be-all, end-all, or the promised land for the male, I lost a sense of respect for him, Vickie, because at the end of the day, for me, there are a lot of men who would like to be in a relationship, no doubt. It's not entirely through their choice, and they're doing the best they can to be in that.
There's also a number that don't want to be in relationship, women and men.
Precisely, and that's a great point. I think that
or they want to be in multiple relationships.
Well, so be it. Precisely, but the extra pressure, I think, and I think, you know, we're sort of on the other side of things too. The other correlation, going back to what I said earlier when I was speaking to this young girl at seminar who'd asked me for my opinion, and I said, well, you know, if you look at, say, divorce, for example, now it generally doesn't end well for both male and female, I would say. And equally, you know, I'm not suggesting that, and I've spoken to plenty of women in domestic who've suffered domestic violence, and that's horrendous. It's not good. I've had women come on board some of the courses I run who've been through some severe domestic violence, and it's not good. It's you know, really, really sad that human beings can do that thing to each other.
I think you're right with saying human beings, because men have suffered through that as well.
Precisely, because on the other end of the scale, you see men who lose access to their children, men who pretty much are turfed on the street. In certain situations,
their whole livelihood changes, their whole life changes, their abode changes.
Precisely,
and they've been abused as well.
Exactly, and precisely. I mean, abuse happens to men as well as you know, female too. And I think that, you know, from the state point of view, and certainly some experiences, and years ago, a guy I was working with, he was one of those statistics where he today, gone tomorrow type thing. And it was quite sad in the sense that, you know, he was jovial and you would never have known otherwise. I don't know what happened, but then when I spoke to a few people, I was saying he's having some personal problems, he wasn't seeing his children. I don't know what went on with him and his ex-partner, his wife, whatever she was. I don't know what justification of vindication, if there is any, because I think there's nothing more, I think there's nothing worse than depriving the person of seeing their children. I truly believe that, and I think obviously there might be situations where there could be a reason for that. The kids are in harm's way, but using it as a pawn is not a good thing. It's horrendous, and you can see how men in that situation.
Well, the emotions get very heightened.
Yeah, it's the straw that could break the camel's back, wouldn't it? Yeah, and you know, I'm interested to know from a female perspective, because I've heard male perspective, I've heard female perspective. Your perspective, having been through what you've been through and your understanding of communication and so on and so forth, what are your thoughts on some men who now are starting to turn their back on the establishment and divorcing themselves literally from the ideological view of life, where the traditional relationship and they're saying, you know what, this isn't good emotionally, financially, and they'd much rather be on their own than take that chance. You know, the loaded gun, so to speak, because you look statistically, you know, statistically, is it 60-70% of relationship and marriage and divorce? And you made a really good point before as well, where when we look at the stats around suicide, we don't include people who won't make the stats, who maybe drink excessive alcohol, who
the families don't want to report it a particular way, or people who go off and just have a drowning or whatever it is. Yes.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts, Vickie, on the correlation with the system in the way?
Talking about the standardization of the marriage, the more traditional marriage, and you know, why would they go into something that they may end up having a 50% chance of coming out financially worse from, not seeing their children? And this is either side, even if it's females as well, who can come out on the other side, and to go through a horrendous couple of years, especially in the UK, going through the divorce process. It's quite different to Australia. You know what, Jimmy, I actually think that it may be a good idea to not be so focused on a traditional marriage and a traditional relationship. I think we are in a state of transition. Marriage hasn't been around since the beginning of time, as people think, you know, right across the world. A lot of different cultures don't have traditional marriages. There's one in China that's, I can't remember the name of the tribe. There's a couple of thousand in a more isolated part of China, and I can give you the link later because they're very interesting to study. It's a purely matriarchal society. They don't have marriages. The elder woman runs the household. There's of course sons and daughters, and they will have relationships, but the relationships is about knocking on the door and saying, I would like to have sex with you. It's used as pleasure. And so the girl becomes pregnant, and she will have that child. It will be a male belonging to another household, a single male belonging to another household. She will have that child, and that child will stay in the matriarch home, and there's no necessarily father figure for him. It's the older brothers or the uncles that have remained in that matriarchal home that form the father figure for the child. I said him, form a father figure for the child. And this happens in, of course, all the homes. So no one has a marriage, and they have everyone lives in the matriarchal's home. However, when that child is out in the street, they're not necessarily sure whose child it was. So all the men look after the children. All of them watch out for the children. All the children could be their children. And this village, or number of villages that are together, is functioning really, really well. And they've only just been doing some research on it over the last couple of years, and they want to keep it fairly quiet because it's turned into a bit of a tourist one. The hardest thing is when they've left the village and gone into more mainstream, they've found it very hard to cope. But there is such transparency in it. And I'm come back again to transparency. Maybe there needs to be transparency where, if we want to have a relationship with someone, we say up front, look, we want to have that prenup, or we want to, I don't want to get divorced from you. I really love you, but maybe we need to have this, and it's not a slight on you. I just don't want to go through drama at the end. If there is an end to it, or maybe we need to look at it that, hey, we're going to have 3 marriages. I had a divorce in when my children were very, very young, and then I met my second husband and had a great marriage, and he subsequently died. Maybe we're going to have 3 throughout a lifetime. I think there's a lot of pressure to perform, and I don't think men generally now, a number of them have said, look, they're really not necessarily happy in their relationships, and they want to talk about them. So they do come and talk to me about their relationships, on how to make it better for them and how to make it work. And couples do too. I have couples that come to me and say, we want this to work. And again, I say to them, look, you either love each other or you don't. And then we can work from there. If you don't love each other, then let's do an exit strategy so that it's not painful. Or if you love each other, let's find a way to go forward. And again, their emotions become so heightened. Everything is manifested into a mess. They're unable to actually hold hands. I get them to hold hands, couples, and I get them to actually listen and then feed back. Oh, so you were really angry when I did such and such, and now you don't trust me. Oh, yes. And the shoulders drop. You know the drill. The shoulders drop. And then you get them to communicate with each other. There's not that communication. And I think going into marriages now, if we don't have an education system on how to teach people to communicate, then they're going to go, oh God, she's nagging me again. If we go down a very traditional route, God, I don't want to get caught up in a mess of gender. If we go down a traditional route, gee, she's nagging me again. She's finding, well, okay, she's not getting something done that he promised to do. So she's nagging. It's not going to work. That is never going to work. Nagging is never going to work. It needs to be communication. Darling, I don't like it when you've said that you would do something and it's not done. It affects me by blah, blah, blah. I know that sounds a very basic speak. It's very clear communication. And without that, these pent-up emotions that you were talking about, oh, God, she's nagging it. Oh, he's not doing it again. I might as well be with another fella. Why the hell am I with him? Why the hell am I with her? Oh, she's changed shape, if you like, we were talking about before, or he doesn't look like he's got a six-pack. He's not in the job that he should be in. Who'd want to be in that relationship anyway? I wouldn't want to be. Nobody really wants to be in that relationship. I think we need to work on this earlier, that it's okay to learn emotions very early and learn how to articulate how we're feeling and how to actually communicate with each other. And the cultural backgrounds that come into it. If you're first generation here in England, you're going to be influenced by your family in the way you communicate. If you're third generation Australian, if whatever we're going, I'm considered over the top sometimes or too straight. From an Australian's point of view, you would just say I'm normal. Normal. Okay, I'm average.
You raise some.
I'm very passionate. Sorry.
You raise some fascinating
if I've skipped over everything there.
For sure. And I think for me, Certainly I'm not advocating for or against marriage or relationships or anything like that. I'm sort of just putting it out there and suggesting that, there are these correlations where I believe.
Understandably so.
Yeah, I mean, one statistics I came across one time, and I stand corrected. The statistic I saw, I think it was a Samaritan statistic, and they talked about how under 45 suicide is one of the highest causes of death in the UK. I think it's not too dissimilar in Australia as well amongst men, and one can only think, well, okay, if we do a regression. And look at the build-up and think, okay, biologically, men needed ideology of what life should be, the shaming, the pressure that they're under, and they find themselves in a situation where they go down the traditional road. They've got this ideological view, and this is both men and women, of what relationships are. So they see the TV, the Hollywood, they see films like Notebook, they see films like, these love stories. And these are...
And also people not being transparent when they're talking to them. I have a great life at home, I have a fabulous family life, when actually it's bloody awful.
Precisely, but the pressure cooker, and you mentioned earlier how women are more likely to vent and talk in a social group, the man's more likely to do social avoidance and keep himself away. And in that social avoidance on his own, we know that human beings are social creatures, not whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. If you're an extrovert, then you're more likely to want to spend more time around people. If you're an introvert, you can make do on your own a bit more, but you still have that human contact. And I think, you see the rug being swept under certain men's feet, and they go from being in a certain position to all of a sudden finding themselves, struggling and not seeing the children.
They're not happy.
Precisely. And it's not anyone else's job to make anyone happy. It's your job to make your own happiness. And if something's not making you happy, then it sort of goes back to the point Vickie was saying before, that one of the things that sort of I disagreed with this motivational speaker who talked about relationship is that I believe undermining men who didn't want to go into the relationship, and he made like a point of it. It was almost like shaming them for not following this supposedly traditional road. And you can see the deflation, like you said, among people like, well, hang on a second here. Who is anyone to tell anyone else how they live their lives? If one wants to live their life in a certain way, not being helped anybody else, and they like it that way, why put the pressure and why do they feel the need to insinuate? And the only thing I can think of is there must be some sort of commercial gain on their part to say, you know what, your life is so bad that it can be better by doing this. Well, we
unfulfilled if you're not in relationship.
Precisely.
I do think that I think that is across the board. I know women that are in their late 20s who have just said, I'm never going to ever be with anyone. I'm never going to, they use the word, I'm never going to find anyone. And these women are stereotypical beautiful as far as magazines are concerned. And they'll go, I'm never going to be with anyone. I'm never going to find anyone. They believe that, again, I think they're looking for what we've seen through the media. I think the media has had an influence with them. They're looking for someone that as you said, has the shoulder, or I said has the shoulders and has the right job and is the doing man, rather than has a particular character trait. You're talking about, is there a commercial gain in the relationships? I have people come to me who say, I really want to be in a relationship, and I don't know how to go out and date. I don't know how to speak to anyone. I'm unable to do small talk is something that happens a lot. People say to me, I can't do small talk. And I'm actually saying for me, there's really no such thing as small talk. You're just yourself. And they've come to me and saying, look, can you help me with the way I'm dressing and how I go about meeting people? And I chatted to one chap, and he said he works these long hours and he can never meet women. Right? He was a manager of a restaurant, and I said to him, you have 200 covers a night. Half of those are at least going to be female. And I said, and you know, even a quarter of those are going to be single. You have hens nights and the rest of it. And I said, you know, you already have a venue where you will meet people. I said, this is going to come down to confidence. So you're talking about these seminars that say you're not right if you're not in a relationship, and selling a way to be, a way to act, a way to dress, a way to behave, words to say. That to me is not being genuine. What we need is the male, the female, the person, the gender, the character is in their core confidence, their core confidence here. They're solid on their thinking, and that they are of worth. The rest is just a bit of decoration. Don't go and follow a path of ticking a box just on having these couple of sentences and how to dress and follow my way. That's not going to work for everyone. As you just said, we're also individual, also different. We can all be confident, though. We can all be confident inside, and that will reflect outside, and we will attract the people that are going to be a contribution to us, and we will be a contribution to them.
No, exactly, and I think that, you know, from a psychological point of view, if we think of our evolution, and we're a relatively young species in the big scheme of things. I mean, the reality is, Vickie, we share 98% DNA with chimpanzees.
I know,
and that's an irony in that, because that extra 2%, we can do so many things. We more than what chimpanzees could do. Chimpanzees, they don't have a vocabulary. We can speak 10,000 words or so. We can do technology. We can do a number of things that the chimpanzee can do. But I think what's fascinating is that imagine 2% beyond us. If we can, the gap between us and chimpanzees, what we can do, imagine beyond us. And so I think from an evolution point of view, you know, literally, we're just sort of coming out of the swamp, so to speak. From that point of view, there's a lot of primal instincts within us. So if we sort of cast our mind back to the beginning, and we strip everything off, okay? We take away the world that we know today, the meaning that we've been given, it's been handed down to us, all this media, all this TV. Let's think for a moment, the species survival, if we look at nature, is probably going to be the biggest priority.
Okay, so breaking it right back down to human beings surviving, human beings.
Yeah, precisely. And I think that the expectations you mentioned earlier, the women's expectations, and I think sometimes, in my opinion, from what you're saying there, equally, women and men put unrealistic expectations on the other person because they see the media, and the reality is most people are pretty messed up to a certain point. They're never going to come up to par. The list is never going to be fulfilled. You know, it is a list that, and even if the list is fulfilled, people then draw another list and another list, but it's only the oxytocin in the beginning that they delete all the things that they don't want to see. But you go in the early days, and the tribe, or if we look at it from a tribal point of view, and this is a proven fact. If we look at the animal kingdom, it's a proven fact where, from a survival of the species, the woman was generally always going to be attracted to the leader in the group, the man who could entice a survival. And this is
what was considered the alpha male. There is a belief system that's what happens.
But let's look at other animals as well, and we can see how the woman has to gravitate to that. Now, we don't have the same challenges we had back then, but all we have now is economic challenges, as well as, obviously, you know, women now can support themselves financially.
Yes.
In the past, rightly or wrongly, and I think it was wrong to a point that the women were stereotyped and told to stay home, and I think the freedom they have now is great. And the fact that they were stuck in relationships in the past that they felt trapped and sort of the social stigma of getting out of that situation wasn't right. But even on the other side of things now, they can now support themselves and they can earn as much in some situations.
So there's no need for a male, is basically what you're coming to, really.
Well, precisely, to a certain extent. And I think with that, the criteria, like you mentioned earlier, that they're looking for, the bar gets raised in one sense. So, okay, let's look for a male who's earning more than me.
Yes.
Let's look for a male who is higher that is motivational speaker that I was listening to has a high social status.
Yes.
And economically very, very viable.
Yes.
Now, not to say undermine anybody, but there's going to be a huge proportion of people that he earns more money than, and socially as a huge network. Now, for a lot of men out there, where do they stand on that? It's like, okay,
They feel inadequate.
They might be kind, genuine, empathic, and all of a sudden they've got to precisely put more pressure on themselves to do what exactly? And, you know, you can fully appreciate there's certain people saying, you know what?
I've had enough.
Precisely, because, you know, we know it's going to affect people's, you know, well-being and mindset. We've talked about male, the pressures on males. And I think, you know, what I like about you, Vickie, you tell it like it is. No, you do.
I'm certainly known for that.
No, you do, and I think that, you know, I think there's parallels between us. We don't take sides. We don't sort of like, you know, say one side or the other. We put the truth out there, and this is the reality. And I still think that from a point of view, a behavioural point of view, I think that there are certain men that build this ideological view of women, and the bonding, the oxytocin bonding with the male and the mother when the male's born is quite strong. Oxytocin being the chemical that bonds the mum and the child in a biochemical functioning person. And that eventually wears off after 2 or 3 years, but the mum still loves the child because you bond an attachment then. And we know in women who don't biologically, and there is a spectrum, oxytocin-wise, the son becomes a striver to try and impress the mum. So I think you could also, the point could also be made that the male then is looking for that same validation as he gets older, that bond again, the ideological, that motherly need. And the reality is it's not really a woman's responsibility to be a motherly figure for the male, because she's got her own life to lead. But
I think a large proportion of us seek to be loved.
Precisely.
And I mean, you're using the terms need, you know, I want to be needed. It's been hard sometimes for me forming a relationship after Andrew's death. One, because you don't actually have a fight and divorce each other. You know, one just dies. And so there's a guilt when you go into a relationship afterwards of, you know, I'm actually cheating. It's a feeling of being like that after the death. I think, you know, there's a yearning for all of us to want to be loved. And I think, you know, the male is looking at where his role is. If women now, as you say, have this independence, this strength, I'm a very confident, independent, strong woman. When I'm seeking relationship or dating, sometimes I have men that are shaking around me and they feel intimidated. And I'm saying there's nothing to be intimidated about. It doesn't matter the socioeconomic level that you're at for me, so much as it matters about your character and your confidence. Because of what's been put in place, that they're not the six-pack, six-figure earning one, they're feeling this inadequacy. And I'm talking from my own personal experience now, and I'll just say, really, I'm absolutely fine just to chat. And it's not about the being, the doing, all that sort of thing. The doing, not the being. And they relax. And I think, as you just said, I put them at ease on a personal level a day. They're out there performing this. They're out there in the workplace performing this. They're out there trying to have relationships. They're out there in their family and their sports, and they're performing and trying to perform optimally. And I'm saying, and I think it's great to try and be optimum, but be optimum in who you are, not trying to reach everyone else's benchmarks.
Of course, yeah, and I think that, you know, we've certainly lifted the lid and covered a lot of areas, and you know, I think it's you know, fascinating. It's been a fascinating conversation, and you know, certainly I think that, you know, yourself with the experience you've had, and you're a great communicator, Vickie. You know your stuff. I think.
I hope so.
No, you do, and I think that, you know, people like yourself who have experienced male suicide firsthand, raising some sort of awareness can go a long way for men to open up, to speak up to. I mean, I not making recommendations who they should and shouldn't see.
There's
But
plenty
equally,
of links and support groups, and there'll be a lot more out over the Suicide Prevention Day and week.
Yeah, I mean, you've got like Samaritans who take calls, and are you aware of any sort of organisations yourself that?
If you type in Suicide Prevention Week, it comes up with a whole list of people to contact. It's feeling comfortable enough to contact those groups, and I would encourage anyone who's feeling in any way along those lines just to ring and feel comfortable enough to chat, like I said, in a safe and happy environment, to feel comfortable enough to talk. That's the start of it. It's a process to go through. It's a start of it, and
because it sort of ties up what we've talked about. Sometimes you need someone to talk to, so it could be a diagnosis, a prognosis you get medically. It could be a breakup in a relationship. It could be losing a job.
Too many work pressures,
Yeah, many things that you just need to offload. And like you mentioned there, whilst I'm not recommending anyone contact anyone for anything other than they see fit to do that. But there are, like you says, lines out there. There are the Samaritans, and if you Google it, there'll be places they can sort of talk.
Even your local doctor, someone's local doctor.
Of course, very much so. That's really important.
It's actually being able to feel safe enough to say it to someone. And it's also that we respect it when someone says that, oh, well, they're just, wanting attention. Don't dismiss that. Just put them into the direction of someone that is able to make a diagnosis or able to listen to someone. And let's change the way that we communicate so that it's okay to be transparent. Let's work on core confidence. Let's not, have something like myself go through, and my children, of course, go through, 8 major suicide attempts and coping with that and living through that. These people are also don't want to leave their loved ones, and yet they're in such a horrendous place and such a painful place. That they think there's no option. Let's change this. I know it's a big thing. Let's change the system and talk about, communications, being able to articulate what emotions we're experiencing when we're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and onwards, and do the, I have this happy and sad model that I spoke to you about earlier. Do this so that we are okay to talk about what we're feeling.
No, that's really interesting stuff, and I think that the subjective experience that you've had in the area, as well as your professional expertise in other areas in terms of communicating, and not implying that you have all the answers, Vickie, but I think that sharing your expertise and your experiences and the experience you have subjectively, goes a long way towards people getting an insight. If nothing
I think
else,
that's it. It's being, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's having an insight.
This is not a Hollywood film where, this is reality. This is just everyday people go through all sorts of challenges, and that's one of the that life is like that. We all go through things, and we all go through. If you haven't gone through anything, you will go through something at some point.
It's very, I don't want to keep you too long. Something that just came into my mind is Andy said to me, look, if a dog was in pain, and I'm in emotional pain at this stage, it wasn't just the physical pain, if a dog was in pain, you would take it to the vet and have it put down. You love a dog or our pets. Vickie, I'm in pain. Please help me kill myself. Please, you love me that much. Please help me die. And that was something horrendous to be asked. And yet he was in that much pain, and you love someone so deeply. And we, of course, had those discussions. And then he said, well, will you read this book on how to help me kill myself? People are being faced with this all the time. And let's get it out there. Let's get people talking about it. Let's not shy away from it. Let's not make it a taboo subject anymore. Let's be transparent.
No, definitely. And I think that, it's a it's an interesting point you've made there. I guess certainly there is going to be a vulnerability when people are diagnosed with a condition in that sort of pressure and stress. So it is quite a contentious issue, I think, in the sense that there is a vulnerability of the person who's being diagnosed with the major condition. So, it's a tough one.
But even if they're not, Jimmy, even if they're not, let's make it okay that someone can actually say to another human being, I am having a really bloody awful time.
Precisely. No, I think that's a good point that you make there, because people if they can talk about it, then there's potentially something you can do about it. If they don't say anything about it, then no one's going to know. Obviously, the vulnerability of someone in that situation.
Their confidence is shot as well. Their confidence is absolutely shot. I deal with a lot of people, of course, being a confidence coach, I deal with a lot of people around confidence, and their confidence is absolutely shot. It's had a lot of knockbacks, and it needs to be reestablished. Yeah,
for sure. And I think that definitely a lot more support is needed in those areas, and definitely
and openness. Let's talk.
I think so too. I think that there is support. I think it's getting better. From what I can see, there's a lot of hardworking people like yourself who work really hard and work beyond their remit to do
that I do a lot. That I do a lot, far too much.
No, and it must be pointed out, because at the end of the day, there's people like yourself who are doing it, and you're getting out there and you're making the effort. And it's important to note that, because you're going beyond, and I think that it's coming from inside here.
I want things to change. I want us to learn how to communicate.
The more people you have like that, the more we can push society on forward, and the better life can be for everyone, to a point.
That's my phone. Excuse me just one moment while I'm so sorry to turn that off. I am so sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm sort of drawing to a close.
Absolutely.
Anyway, and is there any way? I mean, you do a number of things. You do the EQ coaching, the behavioural coaching, and the like. Is there any contact details if anyone wants to get in touch with you, Vickie?
Absolutely. My website is Vickie Lea, Lea, SAS, and that's for standing always solid. So my belief system is let's stand 2 feet on the ground, really solid when we say what we're thinking, whatever our decision is, it's from our core confidence. So it's standing always solid, SAS, Vickie Lea, SAS, and you'll find me. LinkedIn is a great one. Of course, a website, Instagram, all the normal sort of ones, Twitter. Best one for me, of course, is the website or LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Vickie. I really appreciate coming on board the show, and know that we'll keep in touch. Thanks again. Thank you.